All right, this is what we did last week, I guess. The
For the wrath of God is revealed from us, having against all ungodliness and all unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth.
very good, very good. And then,
For what can be known about God is plain to them,
mhm,
because God has said it unto them.
yeah, only it's a different word than said. It means the same.
Spoke it unto them.
No, not spoke. Think about what he's getting at here is creation.
Has
It
shown.
you get shown. I started to say it's the same as revealed, really, but yes, shown. Very good. And this that gets us to today. This is a longer one, but it could work as a verse for our Veritas class. So powerful, so important. And let's see if you can remember this. For his God,
Eternal attributes.
no, this is an I. It's God is spirit, so you're not going to see him with your physical eyes.
Invisible.
Invisible attributes, namely his
Eternal power.
eternal. This means his strength, his eternal ability, power, and this is kind of a synonym for anything referring to God, an adjective that refers to God. He is this. It means godly or sometimes heavenly. Sometimes you'll hear this, especially with more sophisticated people, when they taste something that they really like, they'll say that taste, instead of saying heavenly, they'll say it tastes this word. I'm thinking of it. Let's see if I can think of another synonym. Um, um, hmm, I'm not drawing a blank here. I'm coming up with a clue. Let's see. Uh, in the old days, they used to get people, they would have a stick that was shaped like a Y, and they would walk around. They would supposedly find water this way, and it would dip when they got over water. They'd dig a well there, and they
Divine
call
nature.
divine. They call those things divining rods. Divine nature. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly. This is mean,
Perceived.
yeah, perceived ever since the
Creation of the world
and the things that have been
made.
made. So they are.
Um,
This is the skeptics, the unbelievers, the atheists. They are. They don't have one of these. They are. What's it mean if you don't have something? You are.
if you don't have anything, then you don't.
What's the W? I don't have it. It.
Without.
Yeah, without. And he's telling the atheists, the unbelievers, the skeptics, you don't have one of these because I revealed myself in my creation. So you don't have a leg to stand on. You don't have a.
Um,
You need one of these if you make a no. You need one of these if you make a really low grade when you go home. You need a good
extra
no. You need
credit
no. How are you going to explain it to your mom? You need a really good
explanation.
no.
Why would I explain it to your mom?
Okay. you need a you need a all right. People do this. Most kids do this when they do badly on tests. They give
Um,
and a lot of teachers will say, I don't want any of these. You don't have a. I tell my kids in math, you got to learn your multiplication tables. I'm not going to accept any.
accepting.
It's a shorter
Um,
word. It starts with an EX.
uh, I'm thinking extras, but it's not that.
Like I said, any. It,
Exits.
no, it's like somebody coming up with an answer that's lousy. They're making an
Exception.
no, like it's funny. They're making um,
Making.
if a kid came up to me and said, "Okay, I would have turned my homework in, but my dog ate it," I would say, "That's a lousy."
Yeah, I want to say explanation, but it's just
No,
not.
it works, but that's not the word that's here. Uh, it's a lousy.
Um,
Okay, in a different context, we use it as a verb. And if somebody's in a meeting and they get a phone call, they'll say, "I'm going to have
exempt.
no, I'm going to have to do this for myself. I'm going to have to leave the room for a minute. I'm going to have to." Or If you bump into somebody, you might say, please me, please. Excuse. They are without excuse. What's your excuse for not thinking of that? Okay. All right. For his invisible attributes, that's the qualities of God we can't see with our eyes, namely his eternal power. He is eternal. He's not temporary. He's eternal. And his power is incredible. And he shows his power. It's all powerful, of course. And his divine nature, he's God, have been clearly perceived, seen, ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So, and I tell you what, of course, God knew what he was doing from the very beginning. There's never been an excuse for anybody. When we look at the creation, I mean, you look at animals and plants and bugs and birds and you know the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and you look at the mountains and the waterfalls and you look up at the sky and see the stars and the galaxies and the heavenlies. Even before men had telescopes, even before men had microscopes, they could look at the creation and say, "There has to be a creator." They knew there was a God. This just didn't happen on its own. It was obvious. But God knew, of course, that along in the 1700s, 18th century, men would come along and say, "Let's see if we can't explain this without God." Like Darwin, you know, we're gonna leave God out of this and come up with a naturalistic explanation for it. It was crazy and insane from the beginning, but it worked with a lot of people because they didn't want God, so they just bought into it. And so God raised up in the 20th century, especially molecular biologists, and they started discovering the molecules of life, the proteins, the enzymes, the DNA, all these incredible molecules, RNA, and it just blew them away. And now the scientists will say, the ones who want to be atheists, who choose to be atheists, they'll say things like, I remember, I can't say his name. It's right on the tip of my tongue. There's one famous atheist in England. He's probably the most famous atheist of our day, written a lot of books. Is it Dawson? Anyway, he said in his forward book, he said, we look at things around us and it looks like it must have been planned. It looked like it must be designed. It looks like it may have been created, but we know it wasn't because we know there's not a God. So he's going to say it just looks like. But there have been many atheists who've been honest about it, and they've looked at it like Anthony Flew, and he said I can't be an atheist anymore, and so he rejected his atheism. He knew there has to be a creator. God raised up these guys and the cosmologists as well to look at the universe. They discovered the fine tuning of the universe and they discover the molecules of life. And any of them who are honest will say, obviously there's a creator. Obviously this is designed. Obviously this is made. There's no question about it. It's just that a lot of people don't want to accept God, and they've got other people around them telling them, no, I'm with you. I don't want to accept God either. So they just try to figure out a way to shut God out. So now what they will say is the scientists will say, well, if they want to be atheists, they say, well, we can't explain it. But someday we will. Someday we'll figure this all out. No, they won't. It all points to God. Okay. There without excuse. Let's see if we can. I know this is a hard one to memorize. There's a lot of words here. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they're without excuse. I know that's a lot. I'll help you with it. Can you start it?
For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature,
Perfect.
um,
Have been
have been
clearly
perceived
hmm
um,
ever since
ever since the beginning of creation.
the creation of the world. Ever since the creation of the world.
So they are without
Well, there's one more thing. Ever since the creation of the world, in the things
things that God
that have been
have made.
made. Yeah, the things that have been made.
So
Now,
they're without
so they're without excuse. Yeah, that's a long one. That's hard to get all at once. It's a great verse to memorize, though. Really is. Awesome verse. Okay. All right. Um, I thought of something I was gonna. I may have already shared this with you, but I'll go ahead and tell you anyway. The things that have been made. Um, when I was, I shared this with the Veritas class this morning, the Words of Christ class. When I was a uh, college student at UT, I was majoring in physics. By the way, I had a when I was a high school student in Tellico Plains, I was just a little hick, little country hick, redneck boy from Tellico Plains, mountain boy. And and when I told my guidance counselor I was planning to go to UT, she said, "You can't make it at UT." I said, "Why not?" She said, "You're from Tellico. You don't know enough to make it at UT." But of course, God gave me grace to make it just fine at UT. I had to work hard, but I made it just fine. I majored in physics, but we had to take biological science too, and I took a microbiology course. It wasn't really super complex. Any college student could have taken it, but introduction to microbiology kind of thing. But the guy that taught the course was a young, arrogant doctoral student who his favorite thing was to ridicule mountain hicks, rednecks like me. And he taught, and he would just laugh at the fact that he said all around us here, all over the place in East Tennessee, we got all these Christians who think God created this, but it really is evolution. All the scientists recognize evolution. It's how it got here. It's very clear. We all know that. And he was very arrogant about it. He wasn't nice talking like I am. He laughed, he ridiculed and laughed at people who were believers. That was in the 1960s. And so I didn't know. I mean, I didn't have anybody to help me think this through. So I just decided, okay, I guess I still believed in God, but I said, I guess God just did it through evolution. So I can figure out he must have, because he says all the scientists are evolutionists. So I accepted that. I kind of rocked up, so I call myself a theistic evolutionist. Now, there are a lot of those around even today. There are a lot of people today who say God did it through evolution. In fact, I left this out when I was talking to my Veritas class, but years later, I changed my mind about that, of course, but years later, when I was at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, I was in a seminar, uh, it's called a Philosophy of Religion seminar, but there were 11 of us, I believe, or 13. Let me see. I guess there were 13 of us, and he asked us one day to just raise our hands if we accepted evolution as a fact. And of the 13 of us, only 3 of us didn't raise our hands. I was one. By that time, I'll explain what happened to change my mind in just a minute. But by that time, I changed my mind. There were only 2 of us in there who had any kind of science background. The others had just other majors. They didn't know any science. And of the 3 of us who said no, 2 of us were the guys who studied science. We'd studied it enough to realize this doesn't make any sense, and so we'd rejected evolution. But the others had just accepted it because they didn't know any science. And if you hear something like that guy was telling me at UT, all the scientists believe this. Everybody knows this is true. It's obvious. We all know it's true. You're a hick if you don't believe it. Then a lot of people just kind of say, okay, I guess it has to be true. And so they become theistic evolutionists if they believe in God. Anyway, that's where I was. When I finished UT, I went to the University of Maryland briefly. I thought I was going to work on a doctorate in physics. That's in College Park, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. But while I was there, I began to think I'd never really stopped much. When I went through college in 3 years, I just went in the summertime and everything, just got my degree in 3 years. And I never stopped to thinking. I just got the physics. I did okay in the physics. It was all fine. Thought I was headed in that direction. And then I got to the University of Maryland, and it was almost like God was beginning to work in my heart, saying, "You're going in the wrong direction. You got to change direction." And I remember, of course, I was a country boy from Tellico, and I was in a big city. Washington is a suburb of Washington D.C. And I remember they had a park there. They're called Greenbelt Park in College Park, Maryland. And I would go out in that park. And I remember one time saying, "Lord, I'm so confused. I don't even know if you're there or not. But if you are, I need to get my life straightened out. Please help me get it straight." And I was alone with him in the park there, and there wasn't a lightning bolt or anything. But I look at that as a turning point in my life where God said, "Yeah, you're going in the wrong direction. You need to withdraw from school." So I did. Came back home. Didn't know what on earth I was going to do. Came back home, and I hadn't been home but a day or two when I got a call from a teacher at Tellico High School, and he said, "We need a teacher. One of our teachers had to take a medical retirement. We need a teacher to finish out this year. Are you willing to come teach? We heard you're back in town. You willing to come teach?" So I don't have anything else to do. Sure, I'll do that. So I'm praying all this time, studying my Bible, trying to get things, really getting my relationship to the Lord back where it needed to be. And so I went there and taught 1 year, and that was a pretty good year. I liked it, and I wanted to go back. That's an interesting story too, because at that time uh, I was considered a Democrat because my family was a Democrat family. I hadn't thought much about it, but I did vote Democrat when I was really young. And then the Democratic Party left me way behind. They embraced abortion and they embraced all this sexual revolution stuff. So the Democratic Party years ago left me behind, and I'm more Republican than anything now. But in those days, I was considered a Democrat. And the school board member that was responsible for the Tellico area got up in a school board member and said, "We got in a meeting and said we got too many Democrats in Tellico. We got to get rid of some of these Democrats." And he literally said that in the board meeting. And so there were 5 of us that they released immediately because we supposedly were Democrats and we didn't have tenure. So I was really bitter about that for a little while, and the Lord taught me something there too. He said, "Son, you're gonna have to learn how to forgive these people, or you're gonna hurt yourself with this bitterness." So I got on my knees and said, "Lord, I choose to forgive them," and the Lord took that away. So he immediately gave me a job at McMinn Central. So I went down there and taught a couple of years before I went to seminary. So while I was teaching there, I had a physics class. Really sharp kids there at McMinn Central. And they were asking some really good questions. And among those questions was, what about evolution? And I'd never really resolved that issue. I'd never resolved it. I just kind of called myself a theistic evolutionist. So I was praying about it. And in those days, there were Christian books before the internet, long before the internet, but there were Christian book companies that would publish Christian books, and they would send out, if you went on their mailing list, a little catalog kind of thing. It was like a little leaflet that they would have their latest books that were available. And I got one that day, one day, while the kids were talking about this. And I flipped through it, and there was a book called Evolution and Christian Faith. And I thought, that sounds like what I need right now. So and it was by a man named Bolton David Heiser. I'd never heard of him, but I ordered the book. He turned out to be a brilliant man. He was a zoologist at Johns Hopkins University, which is in Baltimore, Maryland. It's considered one of the greatest medical science schools in the world. That's been their specialty for many years. He was a zoologist, and his specialty was genetics. He was all into the evolution thing. And he said, I came to the place where I could no longer maintain my integrity as a scientist and claim to believe this stuff. He wrote that in the introduction of the book. So he said, I'm rejecting this whole theory now. And he told why. That's what the book was all about. And it was just, I just devoured that book, and it overwhelmed me. I thought, wow, this is so good. I'd never seen a scientist do that kind of thing before. After that, I found a lot of them, but at that point, I didn't know any. So anyway, that changed my perception completely, and I became a creationist. Um, and since then, like I said, there are many, many creationists who are scientists who are brilliant guys. But when God began to show these things to me, this verse just became really, really powerful and really, really important. And it's one of the basic verses I use when I teach Veritas, these reasons how we know God is real. We use this verse a lot. And of course, the evidence that God's given us in His creation, we look at the details. So it's pretty awesome. So a lot of people get really confused. I did when that was in the 1960s. That's a long time ago. Okay. Anything you guys want to mention before I pray?
Yeah, science test in the next class.
Science test. Okay, let's pray for a minute. Father, thank you so much for being an awesome creator, Lord. You are worthy of our praise and glory and honor. Your invisible attributes, namely your divine power, your awesome power, your divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that you've made. And Lord, thank you that in the 20th century you began to raise up scientists to discover the molecules of life in the cell, the proteins, the enzymes, the DNA and RNA, and how it all works together, Lord. And it just blows our minds away. And you raise up scientists to discover the fine-tuning of the universe. Blows our minds away. Just shows us so obviously that you're God and you've created an awesome creation, and it could not have happened away from you. It could not have happened by just dumb chance and some kind of silly notion of evolution, Lord. Thank you for making that clear to anybody who wants to see it. And we thank you for this verse, for making it clear that you revealed it as yourself. So people who reject you are certainly without excuse. But many do, Lord, we know. So help us to know how to respond to those. We know some people are ignorant and they're willing to hear the truth if we'll share it with them, and others are just very belligerent. So I pray that we'll Help us to discern the difference and to be able to share your truth as you open the doors and give us opportunity. So thank you for this time. I pray for the tests these kids are going to be taking. I pray for Cole's test coming up today, science test, and I pray you'd help them to do well. I pray for other tests as well, that you'd help them get prepared and study and learn the things they need to learn, be disciplined. I pray, Lord, that you'd help us to learn the things in ACT today that will help them get a little bit better prepared for that test as well, and help us all to be very disciplined and have a good work ethic in everything we do, to do it for your glory and your honor, Lord. I know you're in the process of equipping these boys and preparing them for a life of service for you, and in different ways that they'll glorify you. And I pray you just help them to get ready for that, and help us all day by day to do whatever we can to point people to you and to give you honor and glory and praise. Help us to listen to you, to be led by you, to get your wisdom when we have to make decisions, to be a blessing to other people, to represent you well. We want to be more like Jesus. We pray in his name. Amen. Yep. Let's see. Okay. We were in the middle of this experiment, and we're answering some questions. So to get it back in your head, it's been several days now. I want to kind of review the questions we've already done real quickly. So just stay with me here. I said you probably didn't need to read this, but let's read it just anyway, just because we've got the time here. But on the real test, you probably head straight to these things and see what the variables are and see what the relationships are. But one of the earliest kinds of particle accelerators widely used was a cyclotron, which operates on the principle that a charged particle entering a magnetic field directed perpendicular to the velocity of the particle will travel in a circle. And that may or may not make sense to you. In the experience below, a scientist investigates the relationships between the strength of the magnetic field, the velocity of the particle, the charge of the particle, and the radius of the particle's trajectory. So he's telling you right there what the four variables are, but you can tell that from the discs. You know, the one that's a little bit hidden here is the magnetic field, but he tells you here he's keeping that constant in the first experiment. Magnetic field of 1 microtesla, that's the unit, 1 microtesla, at microteslas at different velocities. The radius of their paths and the frequency of their orbits were measured. So here you go. There's the velocity, there's the radius, there's the frequency. The orbit was counterclockwise. That turns out to be important too, and to give you the results. And then you look at this and you say, okay, obviously the velocity is going up, and the radius is going up, so they're directly related. The frequency is not changing. So when you hold the magnetic field constant, the frequency holds constant as well. So you learn that from the first experiment. Those velocity and radius are directly related. And then experiment 2, they don't give you any data, they just tell you. The scientists then perform exactly the same experiment as the first one, but replace the electrons with protons, which are oppositely charged. So they tell you that. He put an opposite charged particle in there, and he obtained identical data, but notice the direction of the orbit was clockwise. It changed. Go back here, it says counterclockwise, and now it's clockwise. So when he changed the charge, he changed the direction. The third experiment, the scientist shot electrons traveling 1,000 meters per second. So this time he's holding the velocity constant, 1,000 meters per second, the different magnetic fields, and obtained the following results. So with the same velocity, he increases the magnetic field. Magnetic field's going up. The radius is going down. Those are inversely related. The frequency is going up. So the frequency and the magnetic field are directly related. Okay, so we've already looked at all this. And just a reminder, in the first experiment, the magnetic field was held constant. The velocity changed. In the third experiment, the velocity was constant, and the field was changed. Okay. And then we did this one, I think, already. That's the experiment two. We already read that. According to the information provided, which of the following determines the direction of the object's orbit? And you notice that's what happened in experiment two. It was counterclockwise in the first experiment. It was clockwise in the second experiment. And the only thing that changed was the charge. They replaced the electrons with protons, which are oppositely charged. Exact same experiment. That's the only thing that changed. So the charge is going to be the thing that determines the direction because it went clockwise to counterclockwise to clockwise. Other way around. Based on experiment one, and here's experiment one again, I'm just repeating it, there's nothing new. If an electron was shot into a 1 microtesla field with a velocity of 5,000 meters per second, the radius of its orbit would most likely be, all right, this was 1 microtesla, 1 microtesla, velocity of 5,000. If you go up to 5,000, what do you expect the radius to do? Well, as it goes up, the radius goes up, so you expect it to go up. So you could certainly throw out A. The question is how much? And when you look at, and if you're doubling this one, you might want to check what happened when you doubled it before. When from 1,000 to 2,000, you doubled it. So it's doubling the radius. If you double the velocity, you're doubling the radius. So you expect that to happen again. You expect it to be twice 14.2, 20.4. We did this one already. I'm just bringing it back to mind, okay? I'm hoping you remember all this. I don't think we did this one. I think we stopped on that last one. You guys okay?
Yeah.
Are you? Okay. All right. So look at that one and think about it for a while. Hold on just a minute. Let me see if I got something here. I want to check something just a second because I started to put something else. Not sure if it's on this one or another one. Yeah, hold on just a second. Let me fix something. It didn't come up, but it should have. Give me just a second. Well, shoot, what's going on here? Let's see. Oh, goodness. Well, I'm not getting it fixed. What's going on? Let's try this. Hmm. I'm not sure. It's like all these things have gotten out of whack here, out of order. Hold on. I'm sorry. Let's see. I think I've got it in order. All I did earlier when I was looking at this is put the first experiment back in there as well so you could see it because it's relevant to this. Uh, Now I'll let you think about it.
Would you say that decreasing the magnetic field strength um, would give you more of a frequency, or
Well, are you ready for me to kind of talk with you about it? Have you thought about it enough to, or you,
kind of? But if you were to increase the velocity, because table one, I don't think helps in this one.
experiment one? Okay. It reveals some information to you that you may have known anyway. Go ahead and talk about it though, if you want
Well,
to.
it does. See how it's supposed to help.
Okay.
Because you're increasing audition velocity or decrease, like as shown, it stays, the frequency will stay the same.
That's right. That's what you needed to know.
So F and G are out of the question.
That's exactly right. That's why I put that up there. That's the only reason. Yeah, because when you increase the velocity, the frequency didn't change. I can tell you're freezing. Let me turn this a little bit.
I'm not freezing, I'm just have arms
Okay.
but if you decrease, so looking at table 3, increasing the strength decreases the frequency, but decreasing the strength of the field by, I looked at the wrong one. Hold on. I was looking at radius, never mind. Magnetic field strength. So if you increase the magnetic field strength, you get more. So it would be H. I was just looking at radius and I thought that was the magnetic field.
Okay. Now you almost got there. I think you've made one little mistake here. This is a complicated problem.
Wait, would it be increasing? Because if you look at it down there, you're increasing it by 2 every single time on the magnetic field. So,
All right. You know F and G are out. You got that. So you know it's magnetic field strength. Now they're wanting to increase the what?
they're wanting to increase
The period. And the period is the reciprocal of the frequency. That's why I underline those. So if you wanted to increase the frequency, if you wanted the frequency to go up, you'd be increasing the magnetic field because it goes up with the magnetic field. You see, they're both going up. See it?
Yeah.
But you're not wanting to increase the frequency, you want to increase the period. It's the reciprocal of these numbers, which means you do the opposite. You know, when a number goes up, its reciprocal is going down. So now my clicker's quit working. So magnetic field is going up, radius is going down, getting smaller, frequency is going up, And you have to, if you want to visualize it, you don't have to put in all these numbers because they're not asking for a number. But you'd put another column over here for the period, and it would be the reciprocals of these numbers right here. But obviously, 1 over 6,988, that's a tiny number, but this is even tinier. 1 over 111,800, this is getting smaller. It's going down as these go up, which is what you'd expect the reciprocal to do. If the number goes up, its reciprocal goes down. Therefore, if you want to increase the period, if you increase the magnetic field, you'll decrease the period. If you want to increase it, you're going to have to decrease the magnetic field. So J's the right answer. That's a complicated problem to have to think through when you know the clock's ticking. When you think, oh no, I'm going to run out of time here. So, I'm just showing you. Maybe, yeah, you might say, I want to come back to this one maybe later, maybe, yeah. Or just guess. If you could eliminate these two, you could guess here if you didn't want to think it all through. But all right, here's another one, and like I say, I want you to think about it, and then we'll look at the next slide before you answer it. And you may remember enough to answer it without looking at the next slide. You could answer this without the answer on the next slide just by thinking about what you already know.
Was it B?
B, that would be a logical choice since you're increasing the velocity from 1,000 to 2,000. But here's the reason I wanted you to wait on that. And it's the same kind of thing we had a while ago. Uh, this is experiment 3. Notice experiment. What happens when you change the velocity?
Stayed the same.
Yeah, the frequency stayed the same. The frequency did not change. So therefore, if you change the velocity, what do you expect the frequency to do here? Stay the same. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's it. Okay, here's another one.
Um, would it be F? Or
Um,
does it rotate counterclockwise?
yeah. You'd have to say I better not conclude that because it doesn't tell me much about the mass. I don't know if the mass changed it or not.
So would it be
So,
G? That's
yeah,
counterclockwise?
yep, just like the electron. Yeah, I think that's right. Because you know from experiment 2 that charge determines the direction. So they figured that out. The charge determines the direction. So the only thing you can say for sure, if it has the same charge, that's what it is. It's part of it has the same charge as electron. So it's going to be in the same direction as electron, which is counterclockwise. It's good. Okay. Um, this one I think is pretty reasonable for you to think through without remembering all of it again.
Um, increasing the magnetic field by a factor of 1/4 would. So you could just take a quarter and say 0.25.
Yeah, but yeah, you could if you wanted to. Yeah, you can use 0.25 instead of a fourth.
Well, if you were to decreasing the magnetic field factor by 1/4 would. Well, can you take a look at 0.5 and 0.25 since decreases it. Well, no, because that's half.
But you're going the right track.
Um, it increases the radius by a factor of 2 because wait, hold on. I can't be right because that'd be 22.8 if it was correct because 11 times 2 is 22 and then 4 times 2 is 8, so it'd be 22.8.
Yeah, you're not quite looking at the right numbers. You're kind of hung up on the 2, but it says a fourth. Um, you decrease the magnetic field by 1/4. If I'm going to look at these and think of magnetic fields that decrease by 1/4, or in other words, one of them would be 4 times the other one, I could either look at 4 and 1, or I could look at 0.25 and 1. This is a fourth of 1. This is a fourth of 4.
The increase factor of 4, it decreases the radius by 1/4 as well? Or no?
They're saying decrease the magnetic field by a factor of 1/4. What's going to happen to the radius?
Increases by a factor of 2
Well,
or
if you go from here to here, so you're decreasing the magnetic field. So if you're decreasing it from 1 to 0.25, that's a fourth, 1/4. What's happening to the radius?
it's
From here to here, from here to here.
it's increasing.
Increasing by how much?
Um,
2 or 4 times?
4.
Yeah. Yeah, 4 times 5.7 is close to 22.7. 4 times 1.4 is close to 5.7.
Oh, taking that off.
You see? So you're increasing the radius by a factor of 4. It's obvious you're not decreasing the radius because when the magnetic field goes down, you're decreasing it. The radius goes up, and you're going the other way. When the magnetic field goes up, the radius goes down. So they're inversely related. So if you're decreasing it, you're certainly not. The radius certainly isn't decreasing. They're inversely related. It's increasing. The only question is the factor of 2 or 4. And when you compare the numbers here, find the force. Either one works. Okay. Well, that was a messy science section there, but we handled it pretty well. We're out of time, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll stop there. Anything we need to
Science test. So that's
science test? All right, pray right now. All right. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the way the boys have tried hard to think these things through. And I do pray for Cole and the science test coming up that you'd help him do well, help him not to remember things he's learned, help him not to make careless mistakes, help him use his time well, and just do a good job. Help us the rest of this day to honor you in Jesus' name. Amen.